Last month and this month in the podcast, The Preacher and the Pagan, we were talking about parables and the various learning from parables and the way they've almost been domesticated so that we can have a more comfortable read of what the parables are saying. This week we're looking at two parables, the lost sheep and the lost coin. Now, the lost sheep is very, very popular. The lost coin is hardly known. And one of the sad ironies of that is that we tend to continuously retell the stories that have men as the center. Luke, as a writer, actually often will put stories of women right beside the stories of men. So it's an opportunity for both men and women, or wherever you are on the spectrum, to be able to relate to what is going on, because the kingdom of heaven is not just a masculine experience; it's also a feminine experience. A gender neutral experience. It's an experience for everyone. And the parables help us get into that a little bit. So, looking this morning at the parables of the lost coin and the lost sheep. First of all, we start with Jesus hosting. So this is a change. He's usually the guest, but here he is hosting tax collectors and other people named sinners, which, like today, it's a ubiquitous title which covers a whole lot of people that basically mean those the establishment don't really like. The tax collectors were a tough one because the tax collectors worked for Rome, and they often would jack up the prices of things for their own wealth. So they were wealthy and they worked for the enemy. So there wasn't a lot of respect for these people. And here was Jesus hosting them wherever he was, hosting them. And the Pharisees that were around were looking at this, were ready to condemn him, and did, in fact, point out, like, he's hosting these horrible, horrible people. Like, who is this, and why should we be giving him any respect and responsibility? So Jesus starts, like he does so often, let me tell you a story. And you always have to love when Jesus tells a story, because you prepare for something comfortable and it always ends uncomfortable. Now, we, 2,000 years later, as I said, have domesticated these stories. We've made them gentler, calmer, not as much of a social surprise as they would have been back in the day. So let me try to put that back into the context and what the first century folks would have heard. Jesus starts out by talking about a shepherd with 100 sheep. First off, no one had 100 sheep if they were just merely a shepherd. This was an owner. This is a wealthy person. And right away we have a class conversation. Someone who is wealthy, has the wealth of 100 sheep that he can have out, who has obviously been counting them and keeping very meticulous track of his sheep, notices one's gone. And so he leaves the 99 behind, and there's always some understanding that he leaves them alone. It's 100 sheep. There was going to be other workers. In fact, his entire staff would have been there taking care of the rest. He goes off, looks for the lost sheep. When he finds the sheep, and I don't know anything really about sheep farming from what I can find, but I do understand they're a stubborn, not terribly intelligent animal. And so the sheep is lost, doesn't recognize anything. So oftentimes they'll just kind of lay down and start to cry and bleat and draw attention for themselves, which is, great if the predator is looking for them. But Jesus finds, or sorry, the shepherd finds this lost sheep, puts the sheep on his shoulders, which I also read is not liked by sheep. They will kick and fuss and fight back. And anybody who was around shepherds, like first century people would have been, would know this. This disoriented, cut off sheep suddenly hoisted way up in the air on the shoulders of a shepherd. The shepherd would have had to hold the legs tightly so the sheep would not fall off and hurt itself or run away or whatever. So coming back with this cranky, angry, don't want to be here sheep back to the fold where it can join everybody else, and it's probably in a tiff by now. And everybody around is celebrating, and the owner throws a big party to celebrate the return of the sheep. Now, it sounds like a very interesting story. Where's the point in this? Well, Luke continues on. It says, this is what it's like when one sinner has been found, kind of like the tax collector and the prostitute and anybody else that the Pharisees deem unworthy, that they are celebrated when they are found. Now, one of the really interesting things when we look at the Greek, where the story was first told, the lost is not lost as in ran off. It is lost as in been swayed, been led astray, been led off itself, which is a very different way of looking at it. It's not a happy-go-lucky sheep that just kind of got left eating while everybody else left. This is a sheep that had been led astray. This is where it gets a little complicated in trying to do perfect allegory or metaphor with the parables Jesus tells, because it's always got a surprise portion to it. But how Luke wanted us to understand Jesus' teaching, and how I think we have to look at it as Christians, as followers of someone who has told us about this wonderful world where we're all invited, is that the shepherd, i.e. God, realized one of us was missing. One of us had been led astray, led into something that we shouldn't have gotten into, that was lies, fabrication, dangerous. And God left everybody else together under the care of other guardians and went out to find us. And when we were found, we were cranky, hungry, unhappy. We're hoisted up and we fight it. And God has to hold tight as we are brought back to the safe place. I have talked to so many people who've had this experience of God wrestling with them, or they're feeling like God is dragging them back. And here we have a parable talking about it. That we are not abandoned. We are not forgotten. Doesn't matter that there's 99 and we're talking like 1/10, what big deal it is. I mean, chances are, as one commentator said, they might have celebrated by having mutton for supper. One sheep doesn't seem a lot, but to God it is everything. One is the same as 99. There is no distinction based on value or quantity. Each of us is as important as the rest and as the collective. None of us are expendable. And then it continues on with the parable about a woman, and a woman with silver coins. There's a bias when we read the Bible to assume that everybody in the Bible is poor. Jesus is poor, Mary's poor, everybody is poor, with rare exception. The reality is that's not true. There were a lot of wealthy Hebrew people, there were a lot of middle-income Hebrew people, there were a lot of poor Hebrew people. The people in these stories that we're hearing today, they were either wealthy or middle income, because one had enough wealth to own 100 sheep, and the next is a woman who owned 10 silver coins. Now, in that day and age, one silver coin was an entire day's wage. That was a lot of money. That was essentially almost 2 weeks of pay that she had. Now, that money could have been a whole lot of things. That could have been her dowry gifted to her by her father. It could have been the bride price paid by her husband that came over. That could have just been her inheritance, period, and no one else had to be involved in it. It was hers. It was hers to take care of and hers to be responsible for. And one of the little interesting things is she admits to losing a coin. The owner of the sheep say one of them has been lost. So I thought that was a really interesting difference. But she scours her house. She lights the lamp and looks in every corner possible, sweeps, digs, whatever it takes till she finds the coin. And then she, a completely autonomous individual who's able to do whatever she wants with her wealth, invites her friends in, and they celebrate something that was lost is now found. Again, the same allegory, the same metaphor is brought up. If God is that owner, then God is also that woman who looks for us in the dark places, where we are hidden from sight, where it takes a special light to shine on us to see where we are. And we are just as valuable as the other 9 coins that are still together. There is no celebration, there is no rest until we are found. You know, this entire chapter of Luke can be talked about as a series of lost things, because this every story has to do with someone or something, some item that is lost, that has gone astray, that has missed the point, that has somehow not remained with the whole and has gone off on their own, either through neglect or through oversight or through simply brushed off a table. We don't know specifically. But in every story, the one who is lost is brought back. We don't have necessarily a neat and clean way, especially if we include the prodigal son in this, to look at God in any of the roles. But that's one of the unique parts in a parable, is that God actually is in each of the roles. So in the parable of the lost sheep, God would be the owner looking. God would also be the shepherd taking care of the sheep that have remained behind. We are the ones who are lost, who need to be found. In the story of the woman, very definitely God is the woman who would scour and look and spend all of her energy on finding one of us so we can be returned. The promise in that is that we are not overlooked. When a person is depressed, or they've had a hard situation, or they're living in a world that seems like nowhere out, it is so easy to think that God has forgotten us. But we have, through two very clear stories, the message that no, God is looking for us. We might not even have to do anything to draw attention, and God will still find us where that darkness is. And that it doesn't matter who we are, what category of sinner we might see ourselves in, or anyone else might assign us. None of it matters, because the heavenly host, the gathering of the sainted, will celebrate when we are returned to the fold, when we are made whole, when we are part of the community once more, where we belong, where we were missed, and the whole cannot be complete without our presence. There is nowhere, nothing that we can do, no hole we can hide in, no thing that we are that is so horrible, so terrible, that God will reject us. It's impossible. It doesn't exist. God will look for us wherever we are. We can make ourselves more available or not. That's our choice. But God will not abandon us or forget we are there. The 99 sheep were left to stay, not to carry on their journey. The 10 coins were left in a pile, not put away on their own while something else was looking. The cleanup didn't happen until we have been returned, until the sheep and the coin were returned. We are that valuable to God that we are never going to be overlooked or cast aside or forgotten. And as the people who follow God, who are most likely in the 99 sheep or in the 9 coins, it is our responsibility to make sure everything is welcome home and identify when one is missing. Because then we have an opportunity to also be the hands and feet of God and go looking or find some way to help. This is not just a faith that is done to us. This is a faith that we are actively involved in the outcome. And we have the opportunity to be godlike to the lost. And notice that no one was clubbed over the head. No one was told they're bad. No one was given any negative messaging at all. Just scooped up, taken back, and celebrated. That's what we do when some have been led astray, have lost the game, have gone off script, and they now come back. That's the world God has created for all of us. Inclusion, acceptance, celebration when one of us who was lost is returned.